After Jada rolled her eyes, did she tell you to do something? No. It's like, I made a choice on my own, from my own experiences, from my history with Chris. Jada had nothing to do with it. I'm sorry, babe. I'm gonna say sorry to my kids and my family for the heat that I brought on all of us. To all my fellow nominees, this is a community. It's like I won because you voted for me, and it really breaks my heart to have stolen and tarnished your moment. I can still see Questlove's eyes. It happened on Questlove's award, and it's like I'm sorry really isn't sufficient.
All right, I'll go first on this one. His voice tone completely changes here, obviously, and this is different from any other type of apology I've ever seen, where somebody goes from this really sad thing to this thing where he's trying to look all cutesy and sound like the Will Smith that is in movies and stuff like that. It's just really odd sounding to see him do that. But he adapts with his hands through the whole reading of the question. He starts there like he did at the beginning. And then this whole trying to show how he was being a bad boy, and it's okay because it's almost like he's saying, I'm being naughty or something like that. It's just so cornball at that point he's doing it. And like Mark was saying earlier, here he contradicts himself from saying how fuzzy things were. He talks about how he remembers seeing Questlove's eyes during that and how that made him feel bad. So he's remembering all these little details when he says it's all fuzzy and he doesn't remember anything. He's got all that stuff in his room, so it makes it look like there's a lot going on. He's confused and everything. And then again, he's trying to I don't know. It's a gross feeling to see him doing this. It's just such a off-putting thing he's trying to pull off here. It makes me uneasy looking at him. I'm sure he's trying to be as honest as he possibly can because he's got to apologize, but it just seems so fake. Chase, what do you got?
Yeah, I agree with you. What we're seeing here is contempt in one part of this. I think he's slightly offended by this question, and I think laughing it off like this might be a sign at this point. Jada being in charge of him is that he's very sensitive about. And I know nothing about his life. Just the behavior we're seeing in this clip suggests that he's very sensitive about this point and needs to reassert how small of a deal it is and make it a smaller deal to reassert some kind of masculinity. When he says sorry to my kids and family, there's a mismatched illustrator. And Scott was just talking about this. It's my kids and my family. And then his hand goes down. You can see it perfectly.
I'm going to say sorry to my kids and my family for the heat that I brought on.
And the heat that I brought on is what he's saying. But he's saying this about his family and people around him, but he's saying the heat that I brought on. He's pointing to himself. This could mean that he and his family are kind of the same. It could mean that he's thinking about just the heat that he brought on himself. I'll leave that up to you to decide. Greg?
Yeah, a couple of things. Listen when he is talking about the nominees to his cadence.
To all my fellow nominees, this is a community. It's like I won because you voted for me, and it really breaks my heart.
And then listen when he's talking about his family and whether or not Jada told him to do something.
Jada had nothing to do with it. I'm sorry, babe. I'm going to say sorry to my kids and my family.
Well, when he's talking about the nominees, that's kind of just rote. But when he's talking about her, everything slows down and he navigates the words very carefully. For me, that's a red flag because he doesn't do that very often. And he uses a mix of words. On my own, from my own experience with Chris, there's a cadence shift and a navigation. Ding, 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 something's up right there. What we know is that there is baggage with him and Jada Pinkett Smith and Chris Rock from past jokes. So that's part of the whole equation. As far as did she tell him to do something? She didn't have to, because remember, relationships are microcultures. And I guarantee you, every person who's married, if your wife or husband goes, that's a fight starter right there. And if they do that and then make eye contact with you, it's like, are you going to sit there? So did she make him do something? No. Nobody can make you do anything with that signaling. But in a relationship, a lot of dynamic is going on. We can't see behind the curtain. Insiders to Hollywood will tell you all kinds of things, maybe, people who know all these people, but we don't. What we're doing is working from here. He does that lower teeth exposed thing in a big way this time, Scott. And maybe it is anger, micro expression of anger. Maybe it's something not even micro, an expression of anger. Maybe it's just culture. But when he talks about that at the end of my history with Chris, you see distaste or disapproval right there as he's talking about Jada had nothing to do with it. And then that uncharacteristic pause. For me, I would climb all over that because something's going on right in there. It doesn't make it feel like it's an apology. It's more of a trying to push off. Nobody made me do it. I did something wrong, but not actually even saying I did something wrong. Not coming out and saying, look, if I walked up and slapped somebody on stage, I would have probably come back and said, hey, I was a dumbass. I did something stupid. We're not hearing that. Does he feel some kind of remorse? Yeah. Does he feel remorse for slapping Chris Rock? Not sure that's true. That's what I got. Mark, what do you got?
Yeah, so I agree. This laugh that he does is very different from what we've seen elsewhere, and it just reminds me of stuff he'd do in The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. It is that kind of boyish absurdity around stuff. Now, it's not that that's not probably some part of him. He's a great performer, so he's always bringing out parts of him, but it's still relatively performative. It's still relatively, you kind of think, I think you're acting your way through this. You're performing your way through this bit at this point. So, just as you were saying there, Scott, it really does stand out, that bit, as very, very different and causes some alarm bells. I'm sorry, babe, he says, and we see contempt at that point. Now, is it contempt for her? Well, if it is contempt for her, then any relationship would be doomed. We know that from some extraordinary tests that were done where in therapeutic sessions, if you saw one partner show contempt for the other, they ended up parting from each other. It was a really good call. Well, what we see is that his eyes go down as well, I would say in shame. So I think it's more likely not contempt for her. It's more likely some kind of contempt and shame for himself. And we'll hear about that a little bit later as well. Bitterness in the mouth, absolutely, when he talks about Questlove. So some real kind of bitterness and pain that it happened around that particular great icon of music and culture as well. But interesting, I think we're starting to see the contempt turned inwards, and that's a very strong shame that we might be starting to see here. Now, what's it really shame about? Yeah, as people have been saying, maybe it's not that much shame around Chris Rock, but shame around breaking the cultural norm for that particular industry and that particular environment.
After Jada rolled her eyes, did she tell you to do something? No. It's like, I made a choice on my own, from my own experiences, from my history with Chris. Jada had nothing to do with it. I'm sorry, babe. I'm going to say sorry to my kids and my family for the heat that I brought on all of us. To all my fellow nominees, this is a community. It's like I won because you voted for me. And it really breaks my heart to have stolen and tarnished your moment. I can still see Questlove's eyes. It happened on Questlove's award, and it's like I'm sorry really isn't sufficient.
If you like this video, get the full body language breakdown and analysis on our main channel by clicking this video right here.